You know, we've had 3 decades of school finance litigation in Texas. And since the very first lawsuit back in, 1989, the Supreme Court ruled, the court's been talking about or saying that we needed to talk about structural change. What do we need to do to make the system operate better, more efficiently? And so, to a large extent, the court, in the very first opinion, defined efficiency as productive of results with little waste. The court said very clearly, equity is a component of efficiency, but it's not the only element of efficiency. So we've gone through 3 decades of litigation, and finally we now have a case before the Texas Supreme Court that has all of the issues before it. It has the equity issue, it has the property tax issue, and it has the efficiency issue in the traditional sense. We've got an excellent panel here today to talk about this, and we've got a couple of attorneys that sat through 14 weeks of trial.
17.
I want to first recognize Rick Gray. He's the lead attorney for the Equity Center and the Texas Taxpayers in School Coalition. The long name. But Rick is an attorney who's been involved in school finance since the beginning. He was the lead attorney, I believe, in the very first Edgewood decision, Edgewood 1, one of the most knowledgeable attorneys on the school finance issue in the state of Texas. And I've known Rick for a while. He worked at the AG's office years ago, and if I remember correctly, he cross-examined me in the Shaw redistricting case years ago in Houston. And that, if you remember, the Shaw redistricting case is the one that the U.S. Supreme Court outlawed racial gerrymandering with. But Rick was probably the most eloquent spokesman for the cause and did a great job, and we'd like for you to, would you like to speak from your desk or here?
I'll stand up.
All right. Welcome, help me welcome Rick Ray.
Thank you all very much. As I understand it, we have 10 minutes or so to kind of lay out an overview and then open it up for questions after everybody's spoken. Kent is absolutely right. The issue of school finance has been a thorn in Texas's side for the last 30 or so years. There have been 7 different school finance cases, all come about every 5 or 6 years. The first one was Edgewood 1, then Edgewood 2, then Edgewood 3, then Edgewood 4. Then they changed the name to West Orange Cove 1, West Orange Cove 2, and now the one that's currently before the Supreme Court is the Texas Taxpayer and Student Fairness Coalition case. All these cases center around how do you fund and provide for an adequate education for Texas school children. The Supreme Court in every single instance has warned the legislature that a Band-Aid will not be sufficient, that you need to make structural changes. They've had quotes in the opinions such as, more money will temporarily fix the problem, but it won't fix the problem systemically. The problem has to be dealt with on a structural basis. What the Supreme Court has never told the legislature specifically what to do, and I don't believe the Supreme Court will ever do that because I don't believe that's within their province. In each and every instance, and I know I'm going to sound critical of the legislature, and I don't necessarily mean to be that, but they have taken, I think, the politically expedient way out of the problem, which is a Band-Aid, kick the can down the road, so to speak, and let another legislature deal with the problem. And unfortunately, that pattern has repeated itself for now 30 plus years. The issue that is currently before the Supreme Court, and Kent is totally correct, is the most comprehensive record on school finance certainly ever made in this state, and I believe ever made in the nation. The issues before the court are the typical equity issue, which was one of my main issues. Adequacy, are we adequately providing for the education of our kids? Suitability, which is the system suitable the state property tax claim, which centers around, do districts have discretion, or are the state mandates so comprehensive that the districts have to tax at or about the maximum just to meet the mandate, so they have no local discretion? And one that was championed by Mr. Diamond with his group, the Efficiency Interveners, saying that there is a lot of inefficiency in the system. The mandates the state has on state budget requirements and district budget requirements, that the paperwork is immense. There are issues involving teachers, there are issues involving overall district governance, all of which are have cost implications, and two, all of which put burdens on districts. And Mr. Diamond and his group argued, I thought, quite well, that produces a lot of inefficiency in the system. What Judge Dietz, the trial judge, ruled is he ruled that the system was inequitable, he ruled that it was inadequate, he ruled that it compelled a statewide property tax, but he did not rule in favor of Mr. Diamond's clients, not because I think he felt like factually they were wrong. I think what he felt like was that if the legislature wants to promulgate a bunch of laws and policies that cause certain inefficiencies, that's their prerogative, but then they've got to pay for it. Now, I don't want to read between the lines. That's just my sense of what he was thinking. Now, having given you a brief overview, I want to talk briefly about some of the issues that are near and dear to my heart. First, when you talk about structural changes, the problem in the system, and I think everybody will admit to it, is that the system is overly reliant on local property tax effort to fund the system. And the reason that becomes a problem is because you have vastly different amounts of local property wealth contained within districts throughout the state. Back when I first tried this issue back in 1984, the ratio of wealthiest district to poorest district was 700 to 1. And by that I mean that the wealthiest district had 700 times more wealth to tax than the poorest district compared on a weighted student basis. Fast forward 30 years, and at the time we tried this case, before Judge Dietz, the ratio had dropped to 423 to 1. Some progress, but not huge progress. Fast forward a year later when we get to the Supreme Court, and the ratio at the time we argued this case before the Supreme Court last September had grown to 800 to 1, 823 to 1 precisely. And you say, how can that be? What's driving this? Well, mainly what's driving it is oil and gas in the ground, the value of oil. And I predict to you right now, if they did a study, you'd see that 823 to 1 has shrunk dramatically because the value of oil per barrel has gone from $120 a barrel to $30 some odd dollars a barrel. The problem that presents for districts is, one, they can't budget. They don't know how much money they're going to have from over a long-term cycle. Two, you end up with a district that is wealthy one cycle and poor the next, or poor one cycle and the fracking is developed, and all of a sudden now they're wealthy, and you have no equality in the system because about over half of the system is funded by local property tax effort, with that kind of disparity out there. Now, the other thing the court has mentioned repeatedly is we have over 1,000 school districts, and in Edgewood 4, the legislature attempted to consolidate tax bases with countywide education districts. I actually was supporting the state in that effort back in Edgewood 4, and it was challenged and overturned, and so we have not yet had a vehicle for consolidating tax bases which would drive this ratio. The 700 to 1 or the 823 to 1 would drive it much closer to 20 or 30 or 40 to 1. And the Supreme Court has alluded to, although they've never said it directly, that maybe we need to look at how many school districts we actually have, and is that an efficient number to have over 1,000 districts for a state this size? One, every educator that I know will tell you their district is critical and it's very important to maintain the integrity of their district, and I'm sure they're very sincere when they say that. Two, West Texas is such that you've got tremendous acreage, miles and miles and miles of territory, and if you left with very few people out there, unfortunately, and so if you didn't have a whole bunch of small districts, you'd have kids driving on buses 4 and 5 hours a day. So there's some really logistic problems that have to be dealt with. Now, the two things, and I'm about to run out of time. For the last better part of 3 decades, I believe, the legislature has been under a mandate to study the cost of the programs they are mandating. That's found in Chapter 42 of the Education Code, and they've never done it. We argued, I think persuasively to Judge Dietz, that they haven't done it because they don't want to know the cost, because they know if they knew the cost, they'd know how woefully short they are in funding it. Two, and I'll use the clicker real quick, just to point out some of the issues that were raised and what the current system is. If you look at the slide that's up there right now, that is what is currently happening on the ground. And what I've highlighted in yellow is the top 15%, the 15% richest districts compared to the 15% poorest districts. And what you see is that the poorest districts tax on average at 8 cents more than their wealthy counterparts. And yet they receive $1,978 less than their wealthy counterparts but for taxing at 8 cents higher. What we did this time around is take these numbers and then translate it into what it would look like on at the classroom. And on an average classroom of 22 to 1, that $1,900 value changes to over $69,000 per classroom differential that the wealthy have over their poor counterparts. And then if you go to looking at what the inefficiency built in the system as a whole, districts by law can tax up to $1.17 for M&O purposes, the maintenance and operation of districts. If every district in the state taxed at $1.17, your wealthiest districts would have $3,436 more per weighted student to spend on their kids than your poorest 15%, taxing at the exact same tax rate. And lastly, that would translate into $126,000 more per classroom, taxing at the exact same rate. And when you think about what that means, is that talks about more teachers, better paid teachers, more aides, more equipment, you name it, and it translates into a huge advantage. Now, I'm not here saying, and have never said, that money is the only answer, because it's not. But I am saying that money is part of the answer, and when you had, in this last case, and I know I'm out of time, so I'm going to sit down, we had over 680 districts, I believe it is, out of 1,000 in the case. And it was made up of poor districts that I represent, mid-wealth districts, very wealthy districts, districts such as Eanes, such as Highland Park, such as Plano, districts that by any stretch of the imagination are wealthy. And we all were saying that the system is inadequate and we don't have enough revenue to do the job the state is mandating. And it's easy, I think, for a poor district to say that, but when districts such as Richardson and Eanes and Plano, by all accounts, these wealthy districts are saying it too, I think that caught people's attention because it's a sad state of affairs, and I'm going to sit down, but in the question and answer time, I have some statistics on how we're doing on our STAR testing to see just how bad the system is. Thank y'all.
Great, thank you, Rick. That was a great segue where you said money is not the only issue. That leads us into our next speaker, who is Chris Diamond. And Chris has practiced law since 1995. He's an Aggie, but we won't hold that against him today. He was the lead attorney for the efficiency interveners, and I don't know if you know who the efficiency interveners were. That's Texas Association of Business and 5 families that intervened in the lawsuit, saying that money's not the only issue. So that's the nature of that litigation that and the clients that he represents. And one last disclosure, I'm proud to announce or disclose that Chris is also my nephew. Chris, come on up.
Which also explains why he could rope somebody into this situation. In 2011, Kent approached me about taking this on. I quit my job as an insurance litigator and became a full-time education lawyer. I'm not sure if I've attained that yet, especially working in the shadows of somebody like Rick Gray, but be that as it may, and I'm sure Rick will join with me in the difficulty in summing up 14 to 17 weeks of trial in 10 minutes is daunting. So I'm going to give you my best shot at it because I think it goes to the issue of where are we going and where can we go with this education issue in the future. As we've mentioned, we are the efficiency interveners. The reason that we have that name is straight out of the Texas Constitution. A lot of you have read this. This is the education article, a general diffusion of knowledge being essential to the preservation of the liberties and rights of the people. It should be the duty of the legislature of the state to establish and make suitable provision for the support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools. First of all, I find it interesting that it's not free public schools, but it's public free schools. But the Supreme Court hasn't commented on that. So we've keyed in on this word efficient. And at the end of the day, it rises and falls on whether or not our system is efficient. If we have an efficient system and can create an efficient system, it will be better in the future. I believe that the ingredients that we need for that are right here in the Constitution, as well as what the Texas Supreme Court has said about it. As Kent said, that they've defined efficiency in the traditional economic way, which is producing results with little waste. This is out of the first Edgewood 1 Texas Supreme Court opinion. We've taken that definition and taken it seriously. The Supreme Court has defined it, and now we're going to go into court and prove the 2 elements, which are productive of results with little waste. The next issue, we come to West Orange Cove. As Kent was talking about the segue that Rick gave us, the Supreme Court has also recognized money is not the only issue, nor is money the only solution. We did not come into the lawsuit and we repeated over and over again, we are not saying more money is necessary, we're not saying more money is not, we're simply saying the way that we spend money is important. And so we took to heart this statement that every lawsuit before we got involved was limited to the financing issue. This is the first time that the qualitative efficiency argument has been brought in the state of Texas. But the real fuel for what we did and what we brought in, and a lot of you, if you've been in the other sessions regarding education, you're about to hear a buzzword that you've been hearing a lot today, and that is the word competition. This is straight out of the Texas Supreme Court opinion. Perhaps public education could benefit from more competition. This is not some Friedman-esque daydream of some conservative policy wonk. This is straight out of the Supreme Court. And notice what they say, but the parties have not raised this argument. We took that as an invitation. And well, you obviously want somebody to argue it because you said it. Well, a lot of the lawyers out there nodding, this is what's called dicta, and it's very important. And we believe it was a signal that we want somebody to raise this argument. Well, here we are. We've raised the argument for more competition. The thing about competition is this. Efficiency is productive of results with little waste. The problem is that competition, if you have a monopoly, and in this instance, I'll bore you with a word that Judge Dietz hated, was a monopsony, which is kind of the opposite. It's one buyer and many purchasers of the product. And when you have that, you automatically have inefficiency. Nobody disputed during the litigation that the systems that we have, the system as a whole, as well as each district, had its own monopoly or monopsony, which therefore drove inefficiency by a matter of fact. It was inefficient because it was a monopoly. And so we fought on this issue to show that to increase competition was what was needed in the system. So what we did and what our claim was simply this, and I believe that I've always told people, if I wrote a book about this, my experience into education, I would call it Adventures in Missing the Point. We got this ruling like, well, we think all these things you want, this laundry list of things that you mentioned you're pleading are political issues, so I'm not really going to rule for you or against you. It's just political. Well, that's not really our case. Our case was simply, it was exactly like the finance cases. They wanted a ruling that the funding is inadequate. They wanted a ruling that the funding is inequitable. We just wanted a ruling that the system is inefficient. It is not producing results. The districts themselves proved that by testing graduation rates, career and ready. We had Bill Hammond for the Texas Association of Business, my client, testify that the Texas workforce was woefully, the kids coming out were woefully inadequate and not prepared for college or for careers. And so it was not producing results, and there's massive waste in the system. And yet we were told, well, we're going to stay away. We'll rule for adequacy, we'll rule for equity, but I'm going to stay away from your efficiency argument. I don't believe the Supreme Court's going to do that. We used examples of inefficiency in the system simply to show the strength of our argument. There's a cap on charters. While there's more than 100,000 kids on the waiting list, the system proves itself inefficient is a phrase that Kent fashioned that I think is great. The charter system, based on a 2011 report by Lori Taylor, commissioned by the TEA, stated that charters, while operating on about 25% less budget, were producing maybe a little bit better than, but at least as good as results as the district. Well, if you can produce it for 25% less then what is that telling you? The system itself is proving itself to be inefficient. Financial accountability was very interesting. We got Mark Hurley, who's an investor, not an education guy. He's out of Dallas, and he decided he was going to take it on himself to just study a bunch of districts, and he was going to go to them and give them some tips on how to do with their money. Well, he goes through their financials, and he says, you don't know what you're doing we have no idea what you're doing with your money. You cannot tell by this financial report that the TEA requires you to create. The manual for it's 800 pages long. I think it's Exhibit 1001. And they create these massive reports that tell us nothing. And so there's no financial accountability. Cost of education index, Mr. Gray also argued that. The first formula that every dollar goes through before it's fanned out to the different districts is based on a 30-year-old formula. So we're dispersing our money in a random way. Billions of dollars. Chapter 21, which is basically collective bargaining in statute. We have things like minimum teacher salaries. Tenure pay, where the very best teacher and the very worst teacher are getting the exact same amount because they both have 5 years of service. Or a kindergarten teacher, which is getting the same as a high school physics teacher, although the market says that they should probably be getting different wages. Now, of course, I got called on the carpet of that, and in one of our corner meetings with Judge Dietz, he called me in and he said, Diamond, I'm really pissed off at you because my wife used to be a second grade teacher. Sorry, Judge. So tenure pay, the appeal process for non-renewals and termination cost. It is so costly to get rid of a non-performing teacher. We had a testimony regarding a teacher that was caught drunk in the classroom, and it cost him $50,000 to get him fired. And so this appeal process leads to what's called the dance of the lemons, which is, well, we'll just move them to another school until we get enough complaints there, and we'll move them to another school. The appraisal process. I'm using North Forest ISD as an issue to show how this appraisal process worked. Everybody knows North Forest ISD was failing by all accounts. Finally was taken over by the TEA, finally shut down and turned into HISD. While they're in the midst of just abysmally failing, their teacher proficiency rate was 91.5% proficient. Does that make sense? I'm not picking on teachers, but for some reason that doesn't add up. And so the reason we brought up Chapter 21 is not because we wanted the court to make a bunch of changes, but to show that the number one budget line item are teachers, and look how we're handling this workforce. In no way is it consistent. The last thing I want to talk about, we had Dr. Eric Hanushek from the Hoover Institution was one of our experts, one of the top economic economists in the world. He's been appointed by several presidents. He's worked in the state of Texas on a long-term basis studying our system, so he didn't just come in for the purposes of litigation and create a bunch of graphs. When I called and told him what we wanted to do, he knew exactly what he was going to do. So let me show you an interesting graph here. what we have on the bottom is spending compared to the state average. So we have 0 is the state average on spending. And then on the vertical axis, we have 0 is the pass rate of the tax test. So this is taken from actual TEA data before the STAR test. It was the year before the STAR test came in, so it was the most recent data that we could get. And so we have the two averages at 0. Now what you would expect to see as you move out to the right in that, as you go above the state spending, you would expect to see test scores going up. And you would expect to see all the districts gathered along a line that's going up. As you spend more money, you should get better results. What do we really see? This is statewide TEA data. We really see a downward slope. And even at the place where the averages meet, it looks like a shotgun blast, not following the line. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the way we're spending our money, for whatever reason, whether it's enough money or not enough money, is seemingly not making enough difference based on some of the data that we've shown. So hopefully this gives you an update on what we're doing, what we're waiting for the Texas Supreme Court to come back now and rule on. If you have any other questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. When you put the Hanishak slide up there, it reminded me of something I want to tell them about. So I'll take the privilege of the moderator here. I thought it was really interesting. Eric Hanishak is one of the foremost economists on school issues in the country. Virtually anybody that does research on school finance quotes him or cites him. In fact, many of the experts from all sides of the case cited or have cited Hanishak in some of their work. Right after Hanishak testified, Judge Dietz ran down and got Dr. Hanishak to sign his book for him because he wrote a book on school finance litigation. And then Judge Dietz, in his final opinion, said, I believe that Dr. Hanishak wasn't a credible witness. So just sort of to give you an understanding of what happens sometimes in school finance trials. But anyway, we're going to change directions totally. Our next speaker is Michael Barba. He's the policy analyst at Texas Public Policy Foundation on education and does some great work there. Michael got his degree in philosophy from University of Dallas, and he participated in a fellowship at National Center for Policy Analysis and has done a lot of work with multimedia and has done a lot of research for us over the last year. What is a year and a half you've been with TPPF? A lot of research, a lot of publications by Michael that you can find at texaspolicy.com. Michael?
Thank you very much. So, gosh, let's see. I really like to go hiking, and I enjoy the outdoors. I was born and raised in far west Texas, and we used to go camping a lot in New Mexico all the way up to Colorado. But you can get lost very easy in the wilderness. So you start to make a habit of noting different landmarks, the mountains, any rivers. Sometimes the stars are helpful. One of the reasons that there is so much confusion surrounding school finance is because we don't have any landmarks to help guide us. So one of the things that I hope to do in this presentation is to at least point out a couple of those landmarks so that we can all get on the same page, and that walking out of this panel you at least know, okay, so there's the mountain of school finance, there's the river, there's the North Star. One of the ways that we can do this is by starting to map out the cash flow for state school finance. There are three primary sources for the state with regard to funding public education. The oldest one is the Permanent School Fund. It is a permanent endowment established by the state of Texas a long time ago, in 1850. It now holds about $36 billion in it and is the largest educational endowment in the nation. Despite its size, it only disperses about $850 million each year, making it only $850 million, making it the smallest actually contributor to K-12 education in the state of Texas. The next largest source of revenue is dedicated tax revenue. In the state of Texas, there are about a dozen taxes, a quarter of which are dedicated to public education. The largest of those are the oil production taxes, the natural gas tax, the lottery proceeds. All of that money flows through dedicated tax revenue to public schools. They contribute just over $2 billion. They are eclipsed by general revenue. So general revenue is what the legislature obviously devotes to different causes each session. General revenue has contributed about just over $16 billion. It's a very large source of funds for public education. The next question then is how exactly that money gets to public schools. Well, it gets there through two briefcases, essentially, through two pipelines or two conduits. One is the Available School Fund, which is as old as our state itself, the ASF. The other is the Foundation School Fund. Now, the Available School Fund was originally the only conduit, the only pipeline through which money flowed to public schools in the state of Texas. The Permanent School Fund sent its funds through the ASF, and then the ASF sent those funds to individual schools. In the late 1940s, this all changed. So in the late 1940s, they established the Foundation School Fund, and it supplanted the Available School Fund. Now, the ASF still exists and still does send some money to public schools, but one of the primary reasons that it was supplanted is that the ASF distributes a certain amount per student. It's a per capita allotment, and each student receives the same amount. The Foundation School Fund has all the formulas, all the district level weights, all the student level weights. That's where that money comes out of. Unfortunately, those formulas have become extremely complicated to the point that even the people that work on them don't understand all of them. They understand their little sliver of it, but there are very few people that understand the whole thing, if anybody. Now, the ASF sends the money to individual school districts through the instructional materials allotment, which is meant to buy books. It's meant for computer hardware and software, but only about a fifth of it flows to individual school districts. The remaining 4/5 goes to the Foundation School Fund, and the FSF then sends that money to individual school districts. Now, this is the way the school finance system looked like by about 1990. At that point, recapture was established because the primary source, as it was mentioned, the largest source of support for public education in the state of Texas from any level of government, federal, state, or local, is local property taxes. Those contribute almost $29 billion every year to public education. That's the largest source of money. In 1993, we established recapture, which took funds from the property wealthy districts and put them back in the Foundation School Fund. The FSF then distributes that money to individual school districts. So that's how it looked before 1995. In 1995, the Texas legislature established charter schools, which allow parents a lot more choices with regard to where they're going to send their children. Charter schools have a lot more flexibility with regard to the curriculum that they can provide, and in order to provide that curriculum, they draw on the ASF and the FSF. So this is what the current school finance system looks like, and I hope it at least provides us a couple main landmarks. The Foundation School Fund is really where a lot of the problems lie with regard to the formulas. That said, the next thing that I hope to do, at least a little bit of, is explain how to improve the school finance system. Now, a lot of work has been done on this, and there's a lot of detail in it. I can't go into all of that, unfortunately, but one of the things that I think needs to be observed is that in the school finance trial and in a lot of discussions about school finance, we focus almost solely on equity for school districts. And we look at average allotments in those districts rather than drilling down and saying, are the individual students that we want to receive those funds actually receiving those funds? Now, I'll show you an example of what I mean. So in Judge John Dietz's school finance ruling, he included this table. And it was for compensatory education, which is for students that are at risk of dropping out. And what he was trying to do is say, okay, how much more money are we giving to these 5 districts for these students? And he said, okay, it's about $1,100. But the question that needs to be asked when we look at this table is, okay, in Edgewood ISD, are at-risk students receiving the benefit of that extra $1,100? Now, this is a timely question, and it's an important one, because if we turn to another case that's before the Texas Supreme Court right now, Clint's ISD v. Sonia Herrera, we find that parents are explaining that there is a substantial amount of intra-district inequity. So Clint ISD, to give you a little bit of context, is a district in far west Texas. Sonia Herrera and other families out there send their children to schools like Horizon High School and Horizon Middle School. Just down the road, Clint High School and Clint Middle School, the children that are also in the ISD, also attending the public schools there, are receiving a larger amount of funds. Now they're saying, the parents are saying, this is an inefficient way to run public education. There should be equal opportunity for all students. This is something that I think needs to be spoken about more, that we need to focus on the opportunity that we're providing to students and make sure that it is equitable and it provides for the liberty of those families. So this is something that the Texas Supreme Court wrote in Edgewood 1. They said the structure of school finance in 1876 indicates that gross disparities were not contemplated. Apart from cities, there was no district structure for schools nor any authority to tax locally for school purposes. The 1876 Constitution provided a structure whereby the burdens of school taxation fell equally and uniformly across the state, and each student in the state was entitled to exactly the same distribution of funds. The state school fund was initially apportioned strictly on a per capita basis. Now, Mr. Gray talked about the disparities within the districts. In Edgewood 1, the court observed that it was a 700 to 1 disparity in terms of property wealth, and he mentioned just a moment ago that it's now 823 to 1. The way that education, public education, was initially structured in Texas, those disparities would not have occurred because each of the students received an equal opportunity in terms of the financial support from the state. We need to pursue a student-centered system, a student-centered school finance system. And I think this is absolutely crucial for effective and efficient reform in the state of Texas. What would this look like? At the simplest level, the Foundation School Fund would provide support to individual parents. Now, the individual parents would then use that money in order to determine which curriculum best met the needs of their child. They could choose from a variety of curricula, whether that's a STEM education or more leaning towards the liberal arts. They would be able to use those funds, and the funds would give them, each of the students, equal opportunity while also preserving the liberties and rights of the people. And I'll note in closing that the liberties and rights of the people is the fundamental purpose of public education. Any school finance system which is incompatible with preserving the liberties of the people is incompatible with the fundamental purpose of public education. That needs to be the litmus test for an excellent school finance system in the future.
Thank you, Michael. And speaking of student-centered funding, I think our next speaker has some insight on that. Senator Don Huffines represents Senate District 16, which is approximately the northern half of Dallas County. During his first session, and this was his first session, Senator Huffines promoted transportation funding without raising taxes, phasing out the margin tax on Texas business, and reforms in education such as the Education Savings Accounts program passed by Nevada. He served as delegate to several Republican national conventions, and by the way, I think I saw you on the front row in one of the presidential debates here recently. Senator Huffines attended UT Austin with a degree in finance. He's a small businessman himself and a very impressive champion. In the last campaign, he took out a sitting senator, which is almost unheard of in the state of Texas. So he's also a pretty darn good campaigner. Senator Huffines.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First, is everybody still awake? I mean, it's something else, isn't it? I'd be remiss if I don't thank TPPF for what they do for the state of Texas. This is absolutely the best organization in the United States of America to promote liberty and to promote freedom, and it is absolutely just an incredible honor to be able to speak at a panel here with them, to have them in the state of Texas directing our state legislature. You know, I looked through all the stuff they put out, and I'm like, gosh, there's got to be something in here I disagree with, but I haven't found one yet. So it is exciting to be part of the process. Okay, I got a joke. I got an attorney joke. I'm not an attorney, first I have to tell you that. But this old boy, he was dying, okay? And before he died, he told his two buddies, one was a doctor and one was an attorney, and one was a preacher man. He said, when I die, I want you to throw $1,000 in my grave so I can have something to spend on the other side. And so about a month, they did that, and about a month later, they're eating breakfast, and they got together, and the preacher man said, oh, did you put the money in there? And he said, yeah, I threw my $1,000 in there. And the doctor said, well, I only put 800 in there. 200 went to my medical research. And I said, oh, okay. And the attorney's turn to come up, and he said, yeah, I wrote him a check. I thought y'all liked that one. Okay, how do we get out of this mess we're in? Well, the first thing we could do is change the Constitution. I mean, what the courts are doing is interpreting the Constitution, right? The state Constitution, that is, of course. So one thing we can do is change the Constitution. The governor doesn't have to sign it. Legislature's got to approve it, obviously, 2/3, and we can let the voters vote on it. We can move the Constitution such that we're not so handcuffed, because I really feel like the responsibility of how we fund our schools rests with the legislature. After all, we voted for the budget. We are accountable. We're unarguably more accountable than any judge is. I can tell you that. That budget was approved to fund these schools by 30-1 vote in the state Senate. And I think that this legislature has spoken on that very clearly. Another thing we can do is look at our taxing system. Has property taxes really been a friend of the school finance system? Has it worked? And I present to you that it hasn't worked, and it doesn't work. We need to look at what TPF is proposing to move into, and think of this as a possibility of expanding or having a consumption tax and fund the schools out of a consumption tax, a sales tax. Well, first, before I get any further than that, how many were not here for lunch? Was everybody here for the lunch presentation? Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General Lieutenant Governor from Nevada, everybody was here? Okay, well, they took half of my talk. Now I don't have anything to say. Because there is one another good solution is ESAs, Education Savings Accounts. You know, what I hope, and what I like to ask the question, what does this lawsuit present to the legislature, to our state leaders? It presents us an incredible opportunity. This is an opportunity that we haven't been presented with in a while. We've got Republicans and conservatives that control state government. And what I hope and pray that we do is press a complete reset button on all of education and everything we're looking at it. We need to look forward to the future. We need to have an education system of the 21st century, not the 20th century. We don't need to keep rehashing battles we have fought time and time again in the court system. We need to look to the future, see beyond the obvious. And that's what this is an opportunity about. I hope we take advantage of it. And how we do that is with school choice, with funding. We could be really, really busy next session. If we look at changing the funding system of the school system instead of the spiderweb nightmare that we've got today, let's look at maybe seriously restructuring the whole thing. And that's where school choice comes into play. You know, I really look at school choice and education savings accounts. I filed that bill last session. It's Senate Bill 1178. And as an opportunity, as they said at lunch, that doesn't come around very often. It's not something that we need to do. It's something we have to do. And if you heard the speeches up there today, I feel real confident we're going to get that done in the state Senate, I can tell you. I mean, Lieutenant Governor's passionate about it. I'm passionate about it. I'm on the Education Committee. And what ESAs do, again, as you probably heard, and I don't want to be too redundant with you, take up too much time, but it empowers the parents, it empowers the student. And we need it, like Senator Graham said, universally. We need it for every single person, every single student, and we need after all, you got to think of it. The Democrat and other people like to think of it as, well, it's the government's money. No, it's not. It's the people's money. It's the taxpayers' money. And we want that money to follow the student. We want to empower the parents. We want to empower the student with making a decision, with personal responsibility of their own education system. And we want to get something real clear about ESAs. They didn't say it out here at lunch today, but we're not talking about cross-district pollination, okay? If you're in Dallas School District and and we set these ESA accounts, education savings accounts up for the student, doesn't mean you can go to school in Highland Park, okay? You have to stay within your own district, or you could go to any private school you want to. But unless the district itself wants to accept other students with their ESA money. So if you're in Coppell or you're in Houston School District, you don't have to worry about getting flooded with other students from other school districts. But ESA is the solution. You know, it's the best competitive school choice program that's been thought of. Think of ESAs, education savings accounts, as an operating platform, like an Apple system. And it can take so many shapes and forms as it goes forward. We can figure out what works and what doesn't work. What are the buckets that we want the parents to spend the money in, and how do we hold them accountable? Financial accountability to the accounts, but the comptroller can do that. There's other ways to do that. And how do we hold them academically accountable? What are they learning? What are the students learning that are in the program? And we're going to work on all that, and all of that's very resolvable. You know, as far as what we can do on the reset button, Chapter 21, like everybody said up here in the education code, we can get rid of all that. We need to really rethink the education system in the state of Texas, and we need to make it competitive. Competition lowers the price and increases the quality of everything in America. It's the foundation of how we operate as Americans. It's the free enterprise market. We need a free market to run, and the free market then will dictate what is the cost of education. Everybody says we need to study the cost of education. Well, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. I personally think the only reason you're going to study that is because everybody thinks we're not spending enough. We are spending enough. There are many examples of school districts spending a lot of money. They can't educate their kids. There are many examples of school districts not spending near as much money and do a great job of educating their students. But it all goes away when we get school choice. It all goes away when you can take your money and you can go to a church school. You can go to a private school. You can have a home tutor. You can buy your own books. You can use that money to travel to the school you normally couldn't get to. After all, it is your money. We're going to resolve this issue. I can tell you I have complete confidence in the legislature stepping up and handling it. We might have to work some late nights, but we're going to get her done. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Huffines. You're exactly right. The litigation offers some great opportunities, and that's what this panel is tasked to talk about a little bit today. You know, over time, I guess if you back up, would anybody in their right mind, if they were starting from scratch, design the system that we have in place today? I don't think any of the panelists would agree. I mean, what we've done is through a patchwork system and changing this and changing that session after session, we've come up with a very ugly baby. So I hope that the left and the right can actually come together and do what's right for kids. Let's stop fighting just about equity. Let's stop fighting just about adequacy. Let's talk about what's best for kids in the state of Texas. Let's give them all the same amount of money. Instead of all these complicated formulas that divide the spoils of government. But I'll stop pontificating. And first, before we go to audience for questions, do any of the panelists have comments or questions for the other panelists? How about questions from the audience? Who's got the microphone? This is being recorded, so wait for the microphone, please. Who would be next after that so that we can get the microphone in your hands?
Senator Huffines, this is a political issue, and what Dr. Graham suggested, how would you go about now collecting the votes of the populace and the votes that you need not only in the Senate, but the House to do an ESA bill to get through by broadening the constituency?
Well, I think Senator Graham at lunch said it very eloquently, and that we need to get a better, we need to communicate better, and we need to get obviously more people involved. You know, look, this is an issue that resonates with everybody. It's really, to a certain extent, nonpartisan. And if the people want good education for their children, it doesn't matter if you're in Highland Park or you're in South Dallas. Generally, most people want good education for their kids, and they don't want to be trapped. You know, I look at it this way. I don't care if every kid in that school district goes to Stanford and Harvard. They said, we're doing a great job. If one child in that school district doesn't like it, he needs the opportunity, or she needs the opportunity to take their money and move on. And it's criminal when we do that, when we force these students to be in government schools, all right? Monopolies are bad. Government monopolies are a lot worse. How do we build up a coalition? I think we just got to educate people on the possibilities that we have. We got to be creative. And I think that Senator Graham was right. It has to be completely universal so we have a lot of support. So, answer your question. I think we'll get, obviously, you heard Lieutenant Governor. I think we're going to get her out of the Senate. I think there are some hammers in that toolbox that are really big.
Before we take this question, who's going to be next so we can get the microphone headed your way? Okay.
Barber, I've been around school choice for 25 years, at least 25, maybe it's 30. And I've never heard a talk that actually taught me something new. And that is the ASF, the original funding system was a per capita system, which would be the same as an education savings account. That's very interesting. That may tie in with the efficiency argument in the Constitution. This is the way that at that time they defined efficiency. One person, one donation.
Absolutely, and I think one of the reasons that the legislature established recapture in the early 1990s was because of the disparity in property wealth. So a district with a lot of property could raise a lot of money with the taxes, and then the students there would be funded up here. The other students in districts that had lower property wealth would be funded down here. That wasn't the original intent of the Texas Constitution. That wasn't the way education worked until the late 1940s, and then it got worse and worse over time. The thing is if we revisit and update the spirit of the law, we can provide that equal opportunity to every student in the state of Texas again, and also protect their liberties and their rights.
Meg Wilson.
And who's going to be next so we get the microphone headed your way? Go ahead.
Okay, Meg Wilson, Austin. We were talking after lunch, and one thing that the folks in Nevada did, through the treasurer's office, they've got a website so that educational resources are posted there. So if somebody wants to do homeschooling or tutoring or use new education apps or whatever it is, that those resources are available to everybody. And one of the issues that I worry about is if we're providing this kind of choice to people, that we provide enough support and education to those people who would like the choice but don't understand what to do with it, that they can maximize the value of that choice by having really good resources available to the parents. The homeschool community has built massive amount of support. They support each other. They do it through small groups and larger groups to get some of those kinds of resources, curriculum, readings, tools, apps, etc. What are you thinking about in terms of that kind of support to make choice work?
Anybody?
Well, how to make school choice work for homeschoolers? For what was the question then?
If you take the Nevada model,
Right.
where somebody could be tutored, somebody may go to school half-time and do homeschooling the other half the time, whatever it is that they're doing. For those families that don't have the kind of educational resources that other families have, where do they go to find out what they can do the best? And if they want to start homeschooling, if they want to do tutoring, do they know where to go for those resources?
Well, like Florida has ESAs. You got Arizona that started in Arizona and moved to Florida, and you got Mississippi now that's got it limited, and of course Nevada universally. But they have websites you go to if you're going to sign up for the ESA program, and it has pages and pages tutors you can hire, curriculum you can buy, of course, and homeschooler curriculum. And of course, the students are accountable, academically accountable too, with a national norm test or some sort of testing procedure. So to stay into the program. And the homeschoolers, it was a big battle in Nevada. He mentioned that today at lunch. Y'all heard that. So it's a matter of getting everybody on the same page. And the homeschoolers don't want to be controlled by the government. A lot of private schools, church schools don't want to be influenced by the government either. So we can work all that out.
The Nevada bill sponsor on the last panel this morning talked about that issue a little bit. He made the analogy of cell phones, or, smartphones. We didn't know what an app was a few years ago. But the market sort of takes care of itself. People learn, and they learn from their neighbors, they learn from their friends, and they do what's best because markets work. Let's get the microphone over to Peggy Venables. She had a question. Where's the microphone? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought. Okay, we'll take it to her next.
That's okay. So I'm on the Fort Bend ISD Board of Trustees. So we're pretty entrenched.
Can you hold that microphone a little closer?
We're pretty entrenched in the school finance issue. And I want to say that the education community tends to be a little defensive about the school choice issue in general. But I've heard a lot of good things today. I mean, when I heard the Nevada bill presented, I heard a lot of good things in it. When I heard you speak, Senator Huffines, I heard a lot of good things there. So I think the communication issue is going to be a big piece of it. So the first part of my question is that how can we help in getting communication out there as trustees or locally within our school districts in educating people on what it is you're really trying to do? Number one. And number two, I liked it when I heard you say we need to reset education, because in my opinion, I believe the tail is wagging the dog. And part of our problem is that we have so much bureaucracy, so much regulation. The accountability system, in my opinion, is broken. And until we fix some of those core issues, we can't even talk finance. So what are we going to do about that, and how are we going to get support for that? Because I worked on some legislation last session that we couldn't even get heard. And now that we have a new law from the federal government, I think in Texas we need to look at our accountability system again and see if it's actually working in Texas, which in my opinion it's not.
Well, I'll take that real fast. The ultimate accountability is always with the parent. Look, they are the accountability. And to give them the choice is where you're going to be ultimately accountable. So, but we could have a lot of that. We can have the testing and the financial accountability. What was the other question on how you can help communicate? I think what we have to communicate is that we're not a threat, that school choice is not a threat to the public school system, just like they said today at lunch. And that's the critical thing. I met with every superintendent in my school district since school started. I visit with them. I inform them about the ESA program because I think it's coming. I want them to know that. And I also want to know what we can do, I can do to help them, of course, but they need to understand that this is not a threat monetarily. That's what everybody's worried about. Oh, you're going to be taking money out of the public school system. So once we communicate that it isn't, and it could actually be a big benefit for them, they could gain more money without having the students in the seat to educate. It's also a big relief valve for overcrowding. I mean, Texas is growing by 100,000 students annually. Every year we're growing 100,000 students. If we had 100,000 students sign up for the school choice program and they all went to private schools or homeschool, wherever they're going to do, we're still overcrowded. So that's what we have to do some sort of school choice program just to keep school districts from getting so swamped of students and going in debt.
I'll add just one thing. Senator Huffines mentioned that the parents' ultimate accountability lies with the parents. That is absolutely true. So an A to F system and rating the schools and the districts transmits, the information about how the schools are doing, how the teachers are doing. That's a transparency measure. It provides an amount of transparency for the system. Accountability is what comes after that. What happens when you do well or do poorly? And that's where school choice really helps, because the individual parents can find the school that best meets their children's needs. One of your other point was, how can the ISDs help? One of the I think a great example is Grand Prairie ISD. So they have an open enrollment system, and they have these sign-up sessions where the parents can come before the school year and see all the options within the district and pick between the different types of schools that the district offers. Those sorts of sessions over the course of the weekends really helps parents understand, okay, how does this work in the districts? It also helps teachers and administrators understand how it works, and I think it's a great benefit. We've seen a lot of good things from Grand Prairie because of that.
Before we go to the next one, I want to ask a question. I want to put the two attorneys on the spot here a little bit. You both sat through, you've been involved in this for a number of years. You both trained attorneys. What's your best guess on what and when the court acts?
I'd like to know that answer.
Yes.
Well, the short answer, and I'll speak for myself only, there's no way to know what the court will do. I thought they were extremely attentive, very prepared. They asked very insightful questions that clearly indicated that they had read the briefs and knew the issues. Having said that, it is an exceedingly complicated matter. They had thousands of pages to go through, and I would guess maybe in March, April, May would be the earliest I would expect to see something, but that's just a wild guess.
And what are they going to do?
I have no clue. I mean, I hope they sustain Judge Deeds, but that'll be, I believe.
You don't put any odds on it?
You know, no, because I honestly don't know. I think and I know I'm biased because I've sat through this for a long time, but I think the facts are compelling. And what I've heard the discussions back and forth, and I don't know anything about ESAs. I'm not an educator. I'm not here to say they're good, they're bad. I'm not here to say choice is good or bad. But what I am here to say is that everybody, rich and poor alike, the Texas Association of Business, all have said emphatically that the job is not getting done. We are not providing college and career-ready high school graduates. And everybody has said, when asked, well, what does it take to meet the state mandates? When the legislature mandates you do A, B, and C, what does that cost any district out there? And nobody knows. And the reason nobody knows is because the mandates that are, the formulas that are in the system are 30 plus years old. Never been updated, never been studied. The state who makes these mandates, and with all respect for Senator Huffines, they promulgate obligations on districts, but nobody bothers to find out what does this cost a district. And then this lands in the lap of, like in Fort Bend, Superintendent Dupree, but 1,000 different superintendents out there. These obligations land in their lap and they say, do it, but nobody knows what it's going to cost, how it's going to be done. And the last thing, I'll get off my soapbox, you have the districts out there with vastly different amounts of money to do the job. And all the poor districts have been advocating is put us all in the same boat. We don't care, for starters, if there's more money or less money, but put us all in the same boat. Take away the hold harmlesses, treat every district, every student exactly the same based on educational needs. I mean, there's clearly, it costs more to educate a non-English language speaker than it does an English language speaker, but follow the studies and fund what it costs, but don't throw darts at the wall and say, okay, this is cost X when no one has a clue. And then
Chris, same question.
If anybody's watching the Texas Supreme Court, last session they finished their docket, I want to say 60 days early, and they were very proud of the fact that they got done with their docket and there was not a long delay. I believe I saw somewhere where they wanted to, from the date of argument to the date the opinion came out, they wanted to be around 60 days. Obviously, that's not going to apply to this case with over 1 million pages in exhibits, 17 total weeks of trial, just an absolutely massive record. So I suspect that this court's going to get it out when they're ready to get it out. I don't think there's going to be any politics about it or timing it. I think when they're ready to get it out, they will. I tend to agree with Mr. Gray that it will probably sometime between March and May. And what are they going to do? I believe, and we've kind of, in our briefs, have said, listen, you've clearly invited somebody else to this party, and if you turn us away, nobody else is going to do this, and you're going to be stuck with full school finance cases and only school finance cases from here on out. So you need to do something now. We've proven it. The system is definitely not producing results, as everybody agrees, and there's massive waste in the system. So I believe that our odds are good for a finding for inefficiency for the efficiency interveners, as well as maybe some of the other issues. I mean, some of the evidence I saw from Mr. Gray's case was very, very compelling, and I believe it also goes to this issue of would you create this system if you were just to make it from scratch? I don't believe you would with golden pennies and whatever kind of pennies and all of these kind of restructuring or recapture and all of that. I don't believe that would happen if you're creating it, and I believe that goes to the structural inefficiency of the system. I don't think anybody can make an argument that the system is efficient.
I think Chris is right, and I'll make two last points. The face of Texas is changing. The demographics of this state are vastly different today than they were when I was a graduate of Highland Park High School in Dallas. Two, the state's own standard for measuring are we getting the job done, college and career ready, on the fourth round of testing under the STAR test, right at 50% of all test takers, white, black, brown, rich, poor, right at 50% are flunking the STAR test. If you then look at it on economically disadvantaged and English language learners, you have right at 65% flunking the STAR test. That's what our system is doing right now. All we need to do, and it sounds easy to say, but we just need to restructure this system to focus on educating our kids, rich or poor, black or brown or Anglo. Let's get them all educated and let's get a job force that we can all rely on. That's it. Thank you.
Last question.
Every few years on school finance. I'm wondering, can we address how much of our education dollars are wasted suing taxpayers for more of our education dollars? And wouldn't ESAs really solve this problem?
What was the last question?
Michael?
Sure. The short answer is yes. The long answer is that the reason that it would protect from public dollars being used for things like lobbying or suing for more money is that the individual parents would be using that money to educate their children. In other words, the money would be directed solely for the education of children. Parents choosing the education that meets their child's needs would become the primary purpose of education funding. The amount of money that flows towards lobbying and hiring lawyers would be diminished in that sort of system. So.
Anybody else have a comment on that? Thank y'all very much. Let's give our panel a hand.